I'm thinking about how in MaddAddam, there's this kind of, I just finished the part where Zeb gives the pills to his father and he turns into Raspberry Moose. And he's talking about Adam and Katrina Woo Woo, and who is the scales and tails, the performer, and how brilliant she is and is so good at at manipulating people, and is so intelligent, and that she is actually the original Eve 1. And I'm noticing how the women in these stories are really almost tangential. They're adjacent, that there's this recurring theme of these men. You have Crake, and then you have Adam, who are parallels of sort of a man who, with grand ideas, really believes himself to have answers, and then to have the power to act on his own beliefs and to take advantage of the systems already in place to further his own sort of individual goals. And then you have, Zeb and Jimmy in this parallel of these sort of lackeys who are ride the successes of Crake and Adam, and, are whipped around into these positions of power and influence to some capacity, but are always seem to remain ignorant, and not only ignorant, but unconcerned with the consequences of their actions. And you see the both of them diminishing the harm that they do in the positions that they're put into, very passively by Crake and by Adam. And then over sort of emphasizing the good that they're doing, the good being ultimately serving their own interests, really. Neither of them really have a clear motivation or focus beyond satisfying the needs of, the man, of Crake or of Adam, that's essentially controlling them. And so then you have these women. You have Oryx, if that's her name, and then you have Katrina, who are clearly really intelligent, really capable women that work with Crake and then Adam. And we never really get their perspective or their goals in this work beyond what we're told, almost third hand for the both of them, about their intentions and what they hope to accomplish, and how their intelligence and their capacities are stifled not only by the men that they are with, by Crake and by Adam, but very clearly how the systems in which they work so easily support the rising success of Crake and of Adam, while really limiting their influence and their ability for influence. You have Oryx, who is, and how the positions where they find a degree of influence is in sex. You have Oryx, who, was a child sex slave, as far as we know, and who found autonomy and kind of a sense of purpose and a sense of value within that. And that's where she was able to exact, where she was able to build kind of a sphere of influence and, make actionable changes in her life by manipulating the men who were taking advantage of her. And you see Katrina doing the same thing, in the role of being a sex worker as a means of acting autonomously and enacting influence over powerful men. And that ultimately their power is in their ability to subvert those systems that are constructed by the powerful men around them. And that their role seems recurringly to be, most focused on the ways that they can support Crake and Adam. And that's a function of, their inability to access real influence and real power. And then you have Toby, who, even within this story, there's such a continuing sense of her as secondary. Even in this own story, it's almost a book of her retelling of Zeb's story. And we get her story in Year of the Flood. And so I think it's a degree of that. But there is also this sense kind of continuing in this book that even the fact that her perspective is so continuously focused on Zeb, and that's who the Crakers believe to be influential, that she's a kind of vector or purveyor of his knowledge, of the knowledge of Crake, of, the knowledge of these influential men, these powerful men, but that it's actually her role as conduit that ultimately retains the power. And so it's interesting how she seems to kind of continuously be kind of giving up her influence. I don't know if she's giving it up, but if she feels a responsibility to Crake, to Adam, to Zeb, to maintain their, maintain their influence, maintain their, God damn it, what is that word? Their status, to maintain their status as powerful and to never make them out to be ignorant or foolish, how important it is that they continuously be powerful in the stories that they're telling. And even in getting Zeb's story, we're getting it secondhand. He's not telling it to us, he's telling it to Toby, who's telling it to us. And so even then, we can't really guarantee the truth. And it does seem like as he's telling this story, he has continued to sort of diminish the harm that he's doing, that he's in positions, he's put into positions of power, and then it seems kind of through a willful ignorance to disregard the power that he has. And I think maybe that's partly in feeling inferior to Crate, to Adam for Zeb. But I do think that this is the case for Jimmy too. He was so passive over and over again. And even as he's with Jimmy helping Crake, being in these health-wiser positions, and to some degree it's hard to say how much influence he actually had or how much he was just kind of a fool. that was taken advantage of. But even to that sense, the fact that he could be taken advantage of to that capacity and to be put into positions of power so carelessly and irresponsibly, and that Zeb is doing the same. You know, he's put into these positions where he's kind of taking advantage of these women, but over and over again kind of being like, oh, well, then that's just what I did it as a man, and I kind of had to do that, and you know, where I was, and that was just the norm, and aren't I such a good guy for not wanting to fuck Katrina because Adam was in love with her. And that the women are over and over again regarded, you know, kind of taken and discarded, that it is dehumanizing. And we see that in Scales and Tails even, that they, like, in order for these women to have a sense of power, they are quite literally like dehumanized and turned into an object, and that through that objectification, that is how they then have to assert their power, but that it's ultimately just a result of the, you know, the confines of the system that they're in, that are so continuously serving the interests of horrible men. And I mean, Jimmy does the same thing in the first book of, you know, watching these kiddie porn sites and then acting like it's like, oh, but whatever. And he has sex with all these women and, you know, is ultimately taking advantage of Ren and then Amanda. But even in this reunion, that they still are like in love with him and they still care for him. And that, like, even in this afterlife, really, he's still so positively regarded, and that his foolishness and his ignorance and his carelessness is, you know, accepted and even like appreciated. Like, it's really, he's quite infantilized. But then going back to, you know, the reason I started thinking this was that it just the way that Toby, even within her own story, decenters herself. She centers Zeb. She centers the Quakers. She's there to serve the Quakers. And that as Zeb tells his stories, that her questions and her, or I would say more so her emotional responses, focus on his relationships with these women, and with the primary feeling of jealousy, even in, you know, the destruction of the world in a global catastrophe where all of the women are probably dead. She still is so concerned with the sex that he's had with women. We see that in even the way, you know, that she feels so jealous and envious of Swift Fox. And then as she has these feelings, you know, watching the way that she steps them back and that she, like, invalidates those feelings of herself. She's, you know, talks of her jealousy and then says, oh, you know, this is unreasonable. Like, she's just doing this. And actually it doesn't matter whether he's had sex. Like, she seems to be, you know, consciously aware that these feelings are, I guess, irrational. But they are so forward and centered in her relationship with him. I just think is so fascinating that, you know, that she in some way, I mean, and even, you know, she's kind of unique too as one of the central characters that really in no way participated, you know, or had any like active participation or active influence in the, like, in this catastrophe that we see. Adam, Zeb, Jimmy, Craig, Oryx, Pilar, that they're, you know, questioning like how much information each of them had, and each of them understood kind of the consequences of what really Crake was doing, of what Glenn was doing. But that she's one of, the only main characters that really was not a participant in the enactment of this global catastrophe. And that even as we are reading her story and seeing her story, how much she continues to diminish her own power and her own intelligence, her own capabilities. Like, she is so intelligent and so skilled and so knowledgeable. And, how insecure, that's really what it is, that she continues to be so insecure she's so insecure. And that remains kind of this core emotion even in the end of the world is fascinating. And I wonder if it's, almost like if that is part of the traumatic response of this event, is, holding to that sense of normality maybe that comes from a relationship with a man, and the normalcy of that feeling of jealousy and of those, those external relationships with women, that's so human and familiar. And, or if that's, because that never seemed to be how she was, that there was really no, that I can recall, no indication in Year of the Flood that she, so highly, deeply valued kind of the validation and attention from men. And I mean, even more so, what we see is the development of a fear of men and a distrust. And I wonder maybe then if Zeb, kind of is this caretaker, gives her that sense of protection from the paintballers. But I don't know, I'll have to keep thinking about it. But I think that this recurring theme of the women decentering themselves, even at the end of the world, that it's not what caused it, but that it was, these men's unobstructed access to power through the systems that are already in place, and the barriers to power that the women, it makes me question what would have happened if Oryx had more power than Crake. Would he and does that then put even the responsibility on her? Is this just a way of saying our women are inherently different, or that, if a woman she would kind of stop this catastrophe? I mean, it's sort of, and that goes, to the overarching kind of theme or central question that kind of runs through these books, which is what does a man do with power, and how does he get it? How does he get to a position where he can wipe out the world? And what we see kind of in this unfolding, and I think especially in this last book, where there's a better understanding of the role that Adam and that God's gardeners played in the perpetuation of this catastrophe, and the role that he had in allowing in enabling this, maybe, and actually how he, in some ways, took advantage of it. There's a question of, was God's gardeners then a means of, saving a portion of the population, of providing the skills to survive in this inevitable mass extinction? Was it how much was it sincere? And that's hard to know even how sincere it was. And most of that of what we get is from Zeb and what he tells us. And I mean, he was tortured as a child, so it's always kind of hard to tell if what he's saying is true. I don't know. Anyways.